All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the session 3 of our Python bootcamp. Thanks for joining us. And today we are going to create the user interface. We are already expert in creating and testing smart contracts on Algorand using Python, but now we need to build the interface for our dApp. For example, imagine that you are creating a marketplace for concert tickets, and you need to create an interface that will allow your users to go to your website and buy the tickets. And in today's session, we will learn how to interact with our smart contract from the UI, and obviously, as we expect, AlgoKit can help us to speed up this process. Please let us know on the chat if you are ready for the session 3, and also who is almost ready to claim the certificate of completion. But for that, you need to join us in tomorrow's session, because over there I will share the link so you can claim the certificate. So we are ready for the content, Joe. The stage is yours, and don't forget to share screenshots of the session on your social and tag us. How are you, my friend? Are you ready for today's session?
Yeah, I'm ready. This is where it all starts to come together and we can actually see how users can interact with their app. So pretty exciting. So as we mentioned yesterday, what we're going to want to do is make sure that we have, go to Google, search Node.js. You want to make sure that you have Node.js downloaded. So if you come over to the download tab on Node, and then you can just select the default option here. That should be good. And download it. If you already have Node installed, you don't need to install the newer version. Most somewhat recent versions of Node should work just fine. We're going to be using React in this case. So not using any fancy libs or anything that require a higher version of Node. If you don't have Node already set up, that shouldn't take too long. And once you do have it downloaded and installed, let me go ahead. What we want to make sure is to get started for today's session is that we have our workspace open. You can either just directly open the directory that you've been using for the workspace, so where you have the projects directory, or you can come to the .code space and open the .code space. I just realized that might not properly share. No, that is sharing. Okay. And then you would have your root and this would be called digital marketplace. And what you want to do is make sure that you have this open so you can see, if you go into terminal, you're going to want to go into the root. And then here is where your projects directory are. This is where we're going to be starting the video here in this top level directory. So let me just rename this to what it will be on your end. It's a little bit easier. So you'll be in your digital marketplace directory, and in here you should see projects, and this is where you want your terminal to be. So this is where we're going to get started. And what we also want to do is, if we do an AlgoKit doctor, let me make this even bigger. If we do an AlgoKit doctor, we should see that we have Node and npm available here. If you don't have those, then make sure that you've installed Node from the website, and that if you're on Windows, you might need to explicitly add it to your path. The installer should do this for you. It's not as confusing as a Python, so hopefully it goes a little bit smoother. But once you have Node and npm installed, you should be ready to go. So I'll come back. Great. And yes, someone also in the chat posted a winget command. So if you're on Windows and you use winget, you can do winget install -e-id and then OpenJS Node.js. Okay, and I'm just taking a look at some questions. So someone did find the alternative to grep on Windows. We used that yesterday with pip freeze. It will be find string. So if you were wondering what that would be, that's the answer. And if you are running into errors from the contract, we aren't going to be going too in depth on that today, but definitely go on Discord. I can't recall if I've seen a specific error yet, but you want to go on Discord and post your full error there so we can help you best. But today, we're not going to spend too much time debugging contract stuff. And if you are having errors with your IDE not recognizing your imports, so what you're going to want to do is, so if you're in your smart contract, for example, and you are seeing, first, if it asks you to install recommended extensions, you're going to want to go ahead and do that. And if you're seeing errors from AlgoPy, what you'll need to do is if you open the command palette for VS Code, so on Mac, that's Command-Shift-P. On Windows, I think it's just Control-Shift-P. And you search for Python select interpreter. You want to make sure that you have your VM selected. So your PyDM beginner EN, select the VM, and then use Python default interpreter path. Why did that not work? There we go. Oh, actually, it's because I need to run my AutoCAD Bootstrap again. Sorry, I'm on a fresh computer here. So if you have been following along in the previous bootcamps, you shouldn't need to have to do this. But basically, what you do is you make sure you select interpreter and you select your select the VM here. And once you do that, then you should be able to properly see, there we go. You should be able to Python select interpreter. That's what I need to do. Okay, so sorry about that. So you do Python select interpreter, select that workspace level, and then you want to make sure that you are selecting your VM, and there we go. And now we're connected. Our IDE has been connected to our AutoCAD repo. Now, sometimes that should happen automatically for you. Sometimes it doesn't. Python seems a little bit finicky in VS Code, so you just have to double check that. And that's not an Algorand thing. That's just a general VS Code Python thing. And we got a question about the update to AutoCAD utils. We haven't yet made the official update, but that will be coming soon. The good news is today we won't need that because we're going to be using TypeScript in order to integrate into our front end. So if you're still having a problem with the Python utils, don't worry. We'll be releasing that shortly. But today we're going to be focusing just on TypeScript, so we shouldn't need to worry about it. Okay, so I think I still see some people running with some errors, but we can go on Discord and debug them there. For now, we'll continue on with the front end integration. So much like the previous boot camps, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a pre-recorded video, and we can pause and answer questions as they come up. I want to note that in the beginning of the video, for our smart contract, it shows TypeScript code for our smart contract. This video is written for both TypeScript and Python. So all the commands, everything we do is going to be the exact same. So don't worry if you see TypeScript code where we have Python. The front-end integration is actually the same, which is one of the nice parts of AutoCAD. And I should also mention that this video is about an hour and a half. So I'm going to try to do about half today and half tomorrow. So we'll just kind of go and see how far along we can get. And then we'll pick up the rest tomorrow. Now that we have written our digital marketplace contract and we've tested it, the next thing to do is talk about how we begin to integrate it into our front end. Now, in this specific video, I'm going to be integrating it into a React front end using the AutoCAD template. However, if you don't want to use React or don't want to use the AutoCAD template, a lot of what we go over here, especially in the beginning, is still going to apply to other frameworks. So even if you aren't a React person and you want to learn how to integrate into another framework, definitely stay tuned because we're going to be talking about some general practices about how we can integrate our smart contracts into any front-end code base. So to get started, like I said, we're going to be using an AlgoKit template, just like we did an AlgoKit template for smart contracts. So if you notice at the very beginning, if you remember, when I did an AlgoKit init, I made a project called Digital Marketplace, and I just did a smart contract, and that project is called projects/digital marketplace. In order to add a front end to my project, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the entire workspace in CodeSpace, or excuse me, in VS Code here. So I'm going to, so from the root, I'm going to run code and then go back to directories. And what this will do is this will open up the base directory of my AlgoKit workspace. So because we just did a smart contract, we've only been working in this directory. But now what we want to do is we want to add another project in my AlgoKit workspace. So to do that, I forgot to zoom in on this one as well. So to do that, what I'm going to do is you can see here, this is the directory we were just in. So we were just in projects, digital marketplace. Here's our test, our contracts, all that stuff. And so now, however, if we do an AlgoKit init and we run that, and again, I should emphasize we are in this base repository for a workspace. So we're not in the projects digital marketplace directory. We're in the top level directory here. And you'll know you're there if you see the README and this AlgoKit toml file and the .algokit file here. So if I choose dApp front end, I'm going to just call it front end. And I'm going to choose the production template. The main difference between production and starter is production has more libraries. Because I'm not a good front end developer, choosing the production template actually makes it easier for me to make a somewhat good looking website. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to skip the CD setup for now. And we're going to go ahead and install our npm dependencies. And so what this will do is in our projects directory, it's going to create a new front end directory. And this is going to be where all of our front end code exists. And as you can see here, instantiating or creating a bunch of code for us. So before we get to it, let me just let the dependencies install. And again, first time you're running AlgoKit Bootstrap or AlgoKit init, it might take a second to install the dependencies, but afterwards it'll be pretty quick. Okay, and I'm just going to close out of the front end directory because I still want to stay here in this top level for a second. And so what we can see now is in our root workspace, we have our digital marketplace with our contract and our front end, which has all of this React code for creating a simple front end. So now if I go into my front end directory, let me code projects front end. I can close out of this, make that bigger. And what I'm going to do before we get into any code is I'm just going to run, we can make this one bigger, see how that works. I'm going to run npm run dev. And what this is going to do is it's going to start up a front end project. Actually, let me go have this screen ready to go. So it starts this welcome to AlgoKit, where we can look at the AlgoKit CLI repo. We can connect our wallet. Right now, because we're on localnet, we're just connecting to our local wallet. And then we can send some transactions. But we're not going to go through that. Instead, we're going to be modifying this template to interact with our digital marketplace. So if I come back here, what I'm going to do is if we take a look and we come, actually, if I do an npm run dev again, and we take a look at one of the steps, is this AlgoKit project link all
and it's generating a client for us. And so this is how we link our front end to how we link our smart contracts to our front end. So if I copy that command and just run that independently, so it's a little easier to read the output, you can see what's happening here is that we're generating a TypeScript client code, much like how we generated a client for our testing, except this time, by running project link all, it's not putting the client in our smart contract directory. It's putting it here in source, contracts, and then here's our digital marketplace client. So it's still using the same client that we used in our testing, but it's automatically linking it to our front end for us. And so this algokit project link all command is going to be what we use as you iterate on your contract and want to update your front end. You run algokit project link all, and that'll pull in all of your contract clients. And I say all because one given, so if we come back or take a look out at the projects directory, we could have multiple projects that all have smart contracts, and one of those projects could have multiple contracts. So running link all ensures that our front end gets all of the clients that we want to bring over. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to attack this kind of piecewise. So like I said, at the beginning, we're just going to write kind of framework agnostic code. We're not going to be going right into React. We're just going to be writing basic wrappers around our typed client so that we can easily plug it in to a React component that we later create. So actually what I'm first going to do is I'm just going to commit this just so we can more easily see the files that we create. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to come to source. I'm going to create a new file called methods.ts. And what this file is going to contain is, like I said, wrappers around our generated client. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import star as algokit from algorithm foundation / algokit utils. And I can't save right away because it'll complain about not being used. And then I am going to import my digital marketplace client from contracts digital marketplace. Okay. Now at this point, I can go ahead and start writing my wrapper functions. But before I do that, I need to quickly do some magic. I'm going to pause the video, make sure I install the pre-release version of algokit utils so it matches the version you're going to have when you first get started. Again, you don't have to worry about what I just did. It'll be done for you automatically by the time you're watching this video. But because I'm recording in advance, I had to do some behind the scenes magic, but it should be working now. So now I've imported algokit in my digital marketplace client. I'm going to start writing some wrappers around the methods that I need to actually interact with my contract. So of course, the first thing we're going to do is write a function. It's not going to be async. Write a function called create. And this is going to be a wrapper around our createApplication function, the function that we call to actually deploy our marketplace. So in here, I'm going to pass in a couple of variables. I'm going to pass in my Algorand client. I'm also going to pass in my digital marketplace client. And here, throughout this code, I'm going to call it DM client. In our test, we just called it app client because we were just testing one app client, obviously. But here in your front end, you don't want to make the assumption that you're only going to be integrating with one client. In the future, you might integrate with multiple clients. So it's good to give it a variable name that makes it clear that this is the client for the digital marketplace. And so let me just start with that, and then we'll add more variables or more arguments as we need them. Okay, now in this function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return an async function. And when we actually get to using it, it'll be a little bit more clear why. But the general idea is that I want to create a function that I can pass to a React component that can then return an async function that we wait and be able to update our UI from. So when I click a button, I want it to show that it's loading and doing something, and that something is going to be defined by the function we return, right? So I'm going to say, and again, if that doesn't make full sense yet, we'll connect it better how it connects up when we actually get to the React integration. But for now, follow along, and we're just going to create an async function here. And in this async function, again, it's going to be important that this is just going to be no arguments. It's going to be a void return as well, because this is just going to be a callback function in our React component. So the first thing I want to do is I am going to create my application. So I'm going to call DM. Oh, wait. Why does my thing keep showing up? Okay. I'm sure we can get rid of the terminal for now. Await DM client dot create application. Okay. So far, nothing new, much like we did before. And if we recall our create application, it's going to take in 2 arguments, the asset ID and our unitary price. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to add asset ID. Actually, let me call this asset being sold, just to make it a little bit more explicit. And then I'm also going to add the unitary price. And that is going to be a big int as well. Okay. And so now we can say asset ID going to be asset being sold and our unitary price. Okay, so right now we have this function that if we passed it to a React component with the proper arguments, it would know the callback function to call, or it would call this callback function and create the application. But we need to do a little bit more. So in this example, basically what I want to happen is I want to write this front end to support someone that might not have an asset yet. So maybe they're not coming to the marketplace to sell an asset they already have, but they're coming to the marketplace to sell a brand new asset. And in our simple example, this asset doesn't really mean anything. But in a full stack production app, maybe this asset represents some physical good or some other digital good that's off chain. And so we want a way for people to come to our site and easily be able to create the asset when they create their marketplace. So I'm going to say, let asset ID is going to equal to asset being sold, but I also want to say if the asset ID is equal to 0, then I'm going to create an asset. So I'm going to say const asset create is algorand.send asset create, and I'm going to just match the quantity. So the total is going to be, and we need to know how much we're being sold. So we're going to add a quantity argument here. So our total is going to be quantity. And then we're also going to need our sender to be passed in. So I'm going to pass in our sender here. Okay. So if the user, or if our front end calls this function with an asset ID of 0, we know we have to create the asset for the user, and the total amount we're going to create is their quantity. Now, again, there are many different ways we could implement this. We could ask them also for a max supply and a quantity. We could ask them for more fields to populate the asset with, but we're keeping the code very simple so we can just focus on the smart contract integration. So last but not least, we just need to extract the asset ID from the asset create confirmation dot asset index. Oh, and I always forget to do this. We are going to await. No, it's the wrong spot. We're going to await here, right? So, and we're going to say we know that this exists. And make sure this is lit. Okay, so our function, first off, we're going to assume that our front end, where we're integrating this, knows all this information. We're going to assume that it has an Algorand client and a digital marketplace client. And it's going to tell us all the information about the asset that we're selling and who the seller is. If our asset ID that is passed in is equal to 0, then we're going to go ahead and create a new asset for the user, and we're going to use that as our asset ID. Okay, so right now, if all we wanted was a function to actually create the app, then we're good, we're done. However, when a user comes to this site, they don't really think in terms of what are the ABI methods I need to interact with. They're thinking of what are the logical actions that I want to happen on chain. And in the same step that they create the marketplace, they expect to transfer those assets as well. So we could create a separate function that handles depositing assets separately. However, we can do that in our create function because the user would expect that every time we create the app, we also deposit in the assets that we want to sell. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to say, actually, let's do await DM client dot opt into asset. And in this opt into asset, we need this MBR transaction. So I'm going to create an MBR transaction. And this is going to be the transaction that gives the app address enough minimum balance to opt into the asset. So I'm going to go ahead and say Algorand.transactions.payment. And here we're going to keep the sender. The receiver we can get from the create result. Create. I need to first create a variable called create result. And the receiver is going to be create result dot app address. And then the amount is going to be algokit.algos 0.1 algo for the account minimum balance. Again, remember every account needs 0.1 to start, and then 0.1 for the asset. And then we need to pay an extra fee of 0.001 algos in order to cover the inner transaction to opt in. And now we can go ahead and do the opt-in. Now, what's going to be important here is that we think about what information we need to communicate back to our front end, right? So every time that I deploy a new application, I need that front end to be aware of what that new application ID is. So in order to do that, there's a couple ways we could do that. But in order to do that, and particularly in order to do that in a way that is compatible with React, I'm going to make a argument here called setAppID. And this is going to be a React useState function. But for now, we could just say it's going to be any function that takes in a number and returns void. Now that we have our setAppID function here, we're going to use that at the very end of our function to setAppID. And this is going to be the number of our create result dot appid. Okay, so this is going to be the main difference between how we integrate for testing and how we integrate for our front end. For starters, obviously, we can't assume we know what account we're going to be using because the user is just going to connect their wallet. But also, when we're testing, we are testing each function individually. However, when we're integrating it in our front end, the users don't care about how things are implemented as ABI methods. They just care about the actions that take place. And so we can logically group together our create, of our application and our depositing. So we're going to take care of the opt into asset and the create in one single button click. And one thing I forgot to do here is I'm going to say also await algorand.send asset transfer, and we're going to transfer over the asset ID to the app address. And our amount is going to be quantity. Okay. So in our test, we just did our create and our before all, and then we tested opt-in and the transfer separately. But we can do that all together here because that's basically what the user would expect. Okay, so we have this create function. Now what I'm going to go on to is our next function, which is going to be for buying. So we're going to follow the same exact pattern. We're going to have a outer function here that returns an async anonymous function. And we're going to start off with the same basic thing. So our algorand and our DM client. And now for our buy, what we can do, and we also need to specify our sender. And for our buy, what we're going to do is we need to construct the payment. So much like in our test, we're going to have a buyer transaction. This is going to be an algorand transactions payment. Sender, the receiver, is going to be our app address. And so that is going to be another argument that we pass here, app address string. Receiver is going to be app address. The amount is going to be algokit dot micro algos, and we're using micro algos because our unitary price is in micro algos, and micro algos expects a number, so we're going to take our quantity. So another argument that we have to add here, quantity is going to be a big int, quantity times our unitary price, and that is going to be yet another argument that we need to pass in. And again, right now we have to manually do conversion between number and big int. In future versions of AlgoKit, it'll be able to handle this much better, and everything will be able to handle big ints. So you might not have to do this in the future, but we do at least right now. And once we've formed our buyer transaction, we can just call DM client dot buy, and we can pass in our buyer transaction and our quantity. Okay. And now, one thing we want to do is we also want our app to be able to keep track of our state of the application. So, we want our front end to be able to keep track of the state of our application. In particular, we want our front end to know how much is left in our contract, in our marketplace, how much is left to be sold. Now, we could do this by having a timer that continuously watches the chain and updates our front end. However, to keep things a little bit more simple, we're simply going to report back the amount left every time we do a sale. So to do that, we're going to read state from our contract. Again, much like we did in our test, we're going to await DM client, get global state, and then info is going to be await algorand.account.get asset information. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass in the app address and then our state asset ID as big int. Insert that is known. And then we're going to have a callback function, much like we did before, set units left. And this is going to be a callback function that takes in a big int. And we are going to return here void. I'm going to call set units left info.balance. Okay. At this point, we've gone ahead and we have made sure that all of our functions for both create and buy are covered. However, we still have one more function that we need to get to. In order to implement our delete function, we're going to expose another function, export function delete app. And again, we're going to follow the exact same pattern. We're going to return an async function here. And give me 1 second. I have my cheat sheet here to make sure that I am not forgetting anything. Okay, and this is going to be very simple. We're just going to call await DM client. Oh, we need to pass in our outbound client and our DM client. We're going to await DM client dot delete application. And then one thing we're also going to do here is we're going to pass in a set app ID function. This is going to be able to take in a number and return void. And then we're going to call set app ID to 0, right? So again, much like in create, we want our front end to know when we've created the app, what the app ID is. And when we delete, we want our front end to know that we've deleted and we can set the app ID to 0. Okay, so at this point, this is basically all the code that we're going to be writing for actually interacting with the app. Everything from this point on is going to be implementing it in React in the AlgoKit template. So if you aren't using the AlgoKit template or you aren't using React, you can kind of stop here. However, if you want to see how I actually take this into React, then we can continue on here.
Okay, so I think that's probably a good stopping point for today. So today's session is going to be a little bit shorter and tomorrow's session is going to be a little bit longer. But this feels like kind of the most natural place to stop it today. So to kind of just summarize what we've done today is we've taken, even though we wrote our contract in Python, by running that AlgoKit project build command, and specifically that AlgoKit project link command, AlgoKit took a look at our Python contract, converted it into TypeScript, and then allowed us to integrate in this methods.ts file. So the code we wrote today is framework agnostic. So tomorrow we're going to be using the code we wrote today in our front-end React framework. But the code that we wrote today would also apply if you wanted to use a completely different framework as well. And so this is the beauty of the AlgoKit link functionality, where we can have two completely independent projects. So we have a Python smart contract and a TypeScript front end, and be able to connect them together and in a framework agnostic way. So now that we have this methods.ts file that has all of what I essentially call like our wrapper functions for actually interacting with our contract and kind of abstracting away a lot of these method calls for our end user, we can now integrate that into a front end and make it a really easy experience for both us as the developer and for the user that's eventually interacting with this. And I do want to apologize for the release. I completely forgot to release that for today's session. So all the code that you wrote today, you can follow along and write it today, and it will be valid code tomorrow. But your IDE just might complain in the meantime, specifically saying that the Algorand client isn't defined. Everything with the digital marketplace client and the app calls and everything else, it will function. You're just going to see some squiggly lines under the Algorand client for now, but we'll work on getting that released for tomorrow. And at the beginning of tomorrow's session, we'll make sure that everyone that is following along has updated and is ready to actually run the code. So because we're not running the code today, then we don't have to worry about updating it just yet. And I see in the chat asking for links to the code. So the link to the repo, it's the exact same link from our previous sessions. I will push that up after this session, so it is there available for you. But let me send the link to the general repo. In that repo is where we'll find under projects, we'll have the front end directory, and that is where you'll be able to find it. And then tomorrow, what we'll do is we'll make sure that everyone's on the same page, make sure that we're updated, and that we can continue on actually integrating into React, and make sure not only will you be able to integrate into React tomorrow, but you'll be able to get your certificate. So definitely make sure that you tune in to tomorrow's episode. We'll be finalizing this code.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. And today we learn how we can start creating our user interface. And I always say this, but I'm super impressed by how AlgoKit can make our life easier. And the purpose of this bootcamp is through a project to show you the latest in developer tooling, because the engineering team is working super hard in bringing in these things. And for that reason, we have this small book today. And we want that this content to serve as a base for you, and you can use it to build your own project. So we are here, we are learning. 3 days ago, a lot of us start our journey to start using Python on Algorand. And right now we are able to create our own user interface. So I'm pretty excited. And also remember that you can use the things that you are learning in this bootcamp to participate in our upcoming hackathon. So that could be the best way for you to start using all the things that Joe and the DevRel team have been teaching us in the previous session. So stay tuned, because I'm not sure if we already announced the hackathon. I know that it's gonna be today, but I'm not sure the exact time for that. I don't know if we have another question.
Yeah, I'm seeing one question about the snake case versus camel case. So AlgoKit should be, this behavior has honestly changed a couple of times in AlgoKit over its life, but it should be, when you do the AlgoKit project link all and it generates the client, it should be converting that snake case from our Python contract into the camel case for our front end. If that's not the case, that behavior has changed, I'll cover that tomorrow at the beginning of tomorrow's session when we actually begin to start integrating it. So I will double check on that, and we'll make sure that we're all on the same page tomorrow. I just answered this question. And then also for testnet, so we won't specifically be going over testnet tomorrow. All the code we're writing is going to be network agnostic. So our front end, it's going to work with testnet, mainnet, and localnet all the same. For our testing, we're going to use localnet because we have instant transactions and it's a better developer experience. But I believe I'll cover this in the video, but if not, we can go over it. And maybe I can show it live at the end, is that we'll show how to actually make that change to connect to testnet. It's just a change in the .env file. So your code doesn't change at all. It's just a configuration change. And your app will automatically detect that it's connecting to testnet and use wallet connect and connect to Para or dfly or whatever the end user is using. So we'll go over all of that tomorrow. Hint for the next language supported in AlgoKit, we saw it a little bit today. And there's also going to be a boot camp on TypeScript as well. So TypeScript is going to be the next language officially integrated for AlgoKit smart contracts. We actually have it available now, but it is not yet production ready. So we will be having a boot camp later this month for TypeScript. So if you're interested in writing in smart contracts in TypeScript, you can attend those boot camps. Just bear in mind that it is still in development. It is not yet production ready, whereas Python is fully production ready for building apps on Algorand, whereas the TypeScript is still a work in progress, and it's not yet fully integrated into AlgoKit. But that will be the next language that we see.
And you can share with us any alpha of the third language that we are planning to add to the AlgoKit support.
Yeah, I don't think we have any confirmation on what that third language will be yet. There's a couple of things being planned, but no alpha I can leak today.
Oh, my friend, what's going on? We need alphas. The most important alpha of this week is the hackathon announcement. But today you need to be aware of our social media, because over there you will see all the details. And the next week we will have our TypeScript bootcamp. And then we are going to have a break of 3 weeks because we need to participate in several events. And after that, we will have the intermediate session. So you will have enough time to keep practicing, asking questions on Discord, and then be ready, because we are going to add a lot of new features in the intermediate bootcamp. So we are looking forward to seeing you guys in the intermediate ones also.
Yes, and speaking of events we'll be attending, we'll be going to PyCon US in May. So if you're in the area and think about attending PyCon, definitely let us know on Twitter or Discord and say hello.
Absolutely. All right. I don't know if there is any other question. Thank you so much, Joe, and all the DevRel team that have been working super hard to have everything ready for this bootcamp series, because this year we say, okay, we need to create a lot of content for our new devs. And for that reason, the last week we launched the intro bootcamp. Then we have this Python one. The next week we will have the TypeScript. And please stay tuned, because we are going to have a lot of new bootcamps during the rest of the year. Okay, so thank you all for joining us today, and looking forward to seeing you in tomorrow's session. Have a good one.
All right, bye everyone.